Hello. So, I am so sorry I didn't make a video or a live stream last Sunday, and this is not a live stream either. It's a recorded video, but I'm going to continue reading from the Seed of Yggdrasill. The reason why things didn't work out the last couple of weeks is because my mother-in-law died, and she was a formidable woman, and she's sorely missed. And I haven't had the excess energy to do anything else than all the other things that you have to prepare when someone close dies in the family. All right, that's how it is. Life is life, and I'm going to continue reading where I left off the last time, which was I think I read from chapter 2.7 and chapter 2.8, and that we are now on to chapter 2.9. Let's see where that takes us. Glasses on, and alright, so I read chapter 2.8, the Earth Protective Field and Thor the Thundergod. Now I'm going to begin reading from chapter 2.9, Dwarfs, the Blueprints of Existence. And there is a quote from Völusbå, stanza 8, the Poetic Edda. Ons þrjár kvamu, þursa maujar, åmotkar mjök, ur Jötunheimum. Until 3 females came there, the frost giant maidens, almighty and powerful from the worlds of the giants. Now, as the earth is in her infancy and the universe is newly shaped, the young Aesir are happily playing their games, building temples and enjoying their so-called gold, their divine knowledge. Then 3 giant maidens, almighty and powerful, and quite likely related or perhaps even identical to the 3 fates, well, they arrive, demanding that the young gods get down to business. The appearance of the giantesses is immediately followed by the creation of dwarfs. In her treatise, the wise one of the mountain, Form, Function and Significance of the Subterranean Smith, a study in folklore, 1983, by Lotte von Motz. Well, she made a study of the legendary smiths of Northern European folklore and mythology. She concluded that the smiths generally seem to resemble an ancient priesthood, and strongly suggested that this priesthood originated with the megalithic people of the Stone Age, a priesthood used and oppressed by the new ruling classes that appeared towards the end of that age. The dwarfs of Norse myths, who are also always craftsmen and smiths, fit this bill perfectly. I agree with Motz on most of her analysis, but when it comes to the Edda poetry, I believe that the Edda poets have applied the dwarfs to serve their own ends, to reveal a message about the cosmos and how the limitless spiritual entities could move into the sphere of physical forms and shapes. Usually, when we think about the dwarfs of folklore and myth, we tend to see them much as they appear in Disney's Snow White, for example. Rude, yet charming little forest creatures working in metals and mining. Of course, the image of the dwarf is taken from ancient sources and draws heavily on very ancient mythical themes. the metal-working dwarf living underground, is akin to the dark elf, the Dökkalfur, who lives below ground, forging metals. They are associated with the souls of the dead, haunting the burial mounds. The dwarfs appearing in the Völuspá are quite different beings. Their importance is testified by the number of stanzas that they occupy in the poem Völuspá. 9 stanzas, which is a lot, beginning with stanza 9 in the Völuspá, the prophecy of the Sibyl, or the Sibyl's prophecy, or as I like to call it, the witch's divination. And most of these stanzas, these 9 stanzas, beginning from stanza 9, only render the many names of the dwarfs. The only way to possibly understand what the dwarfs represent in the poetical allegory of the Edda poem is to interpret their names. And this is easier said than done, since there are often many different possible translations, and few of them are absolutely certain. Even those translators who do attempt to make translations make only a few, the ones that they can be most sure of. And this is understandable. However, I am completely convinced that the names are meaningful, as is every line and verse of the Poetic Edda, and I have tried to offer a possible way of translating and understanding what the dwarfs mean. Some of my translations may be faulty or questionable, but as a whole I believe that my interpretation of the dwarf lore in the Völuspá makes sense. Snorri explained that the dwarfs originated like germs in the flesh of Ymir, the world giant, whom I have interpreted as primeval sound. According to Snorri's Gylfaginning, the dwarfs were given consciousness and shape from the power songs of gods. Or as it is said, af atkvæðum guðanna urðu þær vitandi mannvits och höftu mans like och bua då I jörðu och I steinum. Which translates as from the power songs of the gods, where they, the dwarfs, were given the awareness of the human mind and had the likeness of human beings and lived in the earth and in the rocks. In the Poetic Edda, dwarfs appear on the cosmic scene after the ordering of cosmos and the establishment of the positions of the stars, the sun, the moon, and the earth. Then 3 giantesses, called Almighty and Much Knowing, arrive at the court of the Aesir. The 3 giantesses probably represent fate, being the same as the much-knowing Norns that appear after human beings were created, after the dwarfs were created. So they came before humans. So it is fate that demands that the gods must create the dwarfs. The entry of the giantesses leads to all the powers meeting in a first cosmic parliament. A thing. Now, stanza 9. Då gengur regin öll och rökstola, ginn heilig god och om dat gattusk. Ver skyldig dverga, drottom skeppja, or brimi blodku, och or blåins leggum. Then all the powers went to the high chairs of fate, the sacrosanct gods, to discuss this. Who would the king of dwarfs to be shaped from the blood of fire and the limbs of the dead? The 5th and 6th line in the stanza form a question. Who owes the king of dwarfs to be shaped? It's like someone owes this. And what is to be shaped is the king of dwarfs. And the question is, who is to shape him? The riddle can only be answered if we understand who or what the king of dwarfs is. The king of dwarfs is a kenning, that is a poetical metaphor for something else, something that we have yet to identify. The clues to understanding who the dwarf is comes when we hear the ingredients that make up the dwarf king. The blood of Brimir and the limbs of the dead. Back in when I wrote this book many years ago, I translated Brimir as fire. And it could be, but actually it could be more accurate to say that Brimir means a brim wave. That would be the wave that splashes against the shore when it reaches the shore. It's like the meeting between two different worlds, the land and the sea. That's a brim wave. Yeah. And when I write the limb, so fire, I think the brim wave is a better understanding than fire. So I think I was wrong when I wrote fire back then, but never mind. That's what research is. You figure out things along the way, and sometimes you think something is correct and it makes sense, but then later you might actually discover that there is a better interpretation, and then you choose that. That's science. So yeah, I think that it should be said the blood of the brim wave, the wave that splashes against the shore. And the limbs of the dead I wrote, which is I still think it's true. It's Blåin's limbs. Blåin means the blue one, and that is a quite common way, a poetical way of describing a rotting corpse, the dead. So that's not so controversial to say that the blue one means the dead one. So we have the blood of the brim wave and the limbs of the dead. And this is what creates the king of dwarfs. So it is interesting to note that the two names are typical dwarf names, but setting aside the charming forest creature concept and trying to see the underlying meaning here, it is necessary if the riddle, this is necessary if the riddle is to be deciphered. It is necessary here to look at Snorri's description of the creation of the world in Gylfaginning. So, wandering learner, Gangleri, the wandering learning one, asked, what was the origin? How did it all start? What was before? Then Jafnhor, the equally high, or just as high, replied, it was many ages before the earth was created that misty world, Niflheimer, emerged. In the middle of that world lies a well, or a water source, called Bellower Mill, or Bellowing Mill, Værgelmir, and from it runs the rivers of the universe. So this is Snorri's account, and in his account the first world, the first cosmic realm in the world is actually Misty World, Niflheimer, which is also the same as the world of the dead. This is the land of the Rimthursar, the frost giants, with whom Snorri, a few lines earlier, had declared that the creator god lived before time itself. That was when he, Odin, was known as Thunder, thin mist. As is also confirmed in the Edda poem Grimnismål, stanza 54, where he says, Odin, I am now. Old One, Ygr, I was called before, and Thunder, thin mist, before that. The world giant Ymir, sound, was created as icy rivers from this realm of the dead entered the Ginnunga gap, where they met with and were melted by hot streams from a flaming realm in the south. As Snorri writes, Thridi said. Thridi, that means third, and that is another Odin's heiti, a nickname for Odin, the third one. Well, he said, but first it was so that the world in the south of the world, that is called Muspel, it is bright and hot. That sky is flaming and burning and impossible to traverse for those who are not natives. Surtur, Suited One, he is called, who guards that land. He has a flaming sword. We know from the Völuspá stanza 2 that other worlds had existed before the present world, so that the existence of a realm of the dead, even before our world was created, makes sense. It is the frosty remains of previous worlds, the dead worlds, which provide substance and matter in the shape of streams to the great point zero of creation. Moreover, from the same realm emerges the frost giant Buri, which I have interpreted as the storage chamber. Well, and this frost giant, the storage chamber, had been lying dormant beneath the ice of death, the ice of Niflheimr, the misty world. And we must assume that he has laid there since the death of the previous world. And maybe he lived in that previous world. As the hot tongue of the great cow, Audhumbla, abundant brew ingredients, she came from the fiery south and licked the eyes of death in order to nurture herself, so that she in turn may nurture the world giant created by melting ice. But, when she does this, when she nurtures herself, her hot tongue makes him re-emerge from the death ice, and he becomes the grandfather of the Aesir. He is Odin's grandfather. The limbs of the frost giant make up the world. What we are seeing here is a mythical formula for creation, ice and fire, which could be translated to cold, still death and fiery, moving life force. Well, these two, the cold and the hot, come together at the very beginning. The fire of life, represented by the cosmic cow, melts the cold of death and nurtures new life, represented by Ymir and Buri, the sound and the storage chamber, from where awareness emerges in the form of Aesir. This formula of creation, fire and death, is the same formula applied in the creation of the king of dwarfs. One would almost assume that the king of dwarfs either refers to Ymir or to Buri, or to both, as they could very well be ultimately identical to each other. So, let us I'd say this, that since I later changed my interpretation of Brimir from meaning fire to meaning a brimwave, all this that I just told you about will have to be actually edited a bit. It's not wrong. What's wrong is maybe that Brimir means fire, and then the whole argument falls apart, really, even if it was a good argument when I thought that it meant fire. However, what we have instead of fire and cold, as in death, we have a brimwave, a movement, and a clash between two worlds and death. And this is what creates. And as you might remember, there is a lot of waves going on in the beginning too. So you have a brimwave, and you have the dead one, which could also be a way of saying Ymir, because his world, the world was created from his body after he died. So there is still a connection here between the actual creation story and this story of how the first dwarf was created. Let us move to the next stanza about the dwarfs. It begins by declaring that, stanza 10, Þar var modsogner mestremorðin dverga allra en durin annar. Okay, I read. Then was modsogner the greatest and the highest of all dwarfs, the king of dwarfs. Now we must try to identify modsogner. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Again, I have done some rethinking around the meaning of names. So let's see what I wrote back then. Since we are used to thinking of names as merely sounds, we will easily assume beforehand that this dwarf is a different one from that king of dwarfs we just heard about. However, it should be clear by now that a number of names may very well be referring to only one being, since names are merely metaphors describing the character. And to apply a new metaphor each time one character is referred to was a basic rule of Norse poetry. It was how they made poetry. This was how they actually presented their mythology as well, through poetry. And they would never refer to one being by the same name all the time. No, they would really be inventive about describing one single character in countless ways. The more ways you could describe one character, the better a poet you were. They liked that. So, and this is very hard for our modern minds to wrap our minds around, because we like to have them quite separate, and that's one's there and that's got this name, and then if someone has another name it has to be a completely different person. Well, that's not how Old Norse poetry works. It works that way, that it will describe one being with many different names and many different descriptions as well. So, okay, so the name modsogner is a difficult one to interpret. The first part of the word could either be moder, which means something like exhausted as an adjective, or as a masculine singular, it could mean the mind or the intent. Or we have another version that means courage or mental turmoil. Another word that it could have been used to create it is mot, which means mark, stamp, image, shape or form or type, or even assembling, meeting, council, fusion, or even the adverb against. So we have many different possible meanings of the first part of the name, mod or mot. It is written differently in different sources, I think. So it could either be moder, mod, or mot, as in mark, stamp, image. The second part of the name is sogner, which could be derived from the neutral noun sog, which means sucking, as in suction power. And it refers specifically to the suction force of a submerged wave. Interesting. As in a sort of inverted vortex. And it could also just refer to the ocean, which was in itself perceived as a potential sucker for drowned people. It sucks you down. And so this is, the sogner means something or someone that actually pulls, sucks. It's a suction force. So, and I have written, it is also possible that the word is really sogner, which could be derived from the feminine word sokken or sogner, which means application or seeking or searching or praying or accusing too. So here we have a word with very many different possible meanings of both the parts of the word or the name. So that is a good example why translators of Old Norse texts are cautious about presenting a name in translation. It is very understandable. You don't want to put, if you want an academic career at least, you don't want to put your head out there on the block by assuming that something, well, suggesting that a very difficult name actually means this or that. It has so many different possible meanings that you have to really work hard to figure out how it fits, what fits best. And you might be wrong, I might be wrong, but This is the problem of translating names. So, it is hard to see what the most plausible interpretation is if none of the options make any sense from the point of our modern worldview, and without any certain knowledge about the ancient worldview. We need to look to the poem again and see if there are any clues as to which translation is the best. And further down in the same stanza, in the same verse, we read En durin annar. Deir mannelikun mörg omgörðu, dvergar gjörðu, sem durin sagði. I'll just read the whole verse together. I sort of split it up here. Dat var modsoknir, mastremordin, dverga allra, en durin annar. Deir mannelikun, mörgum görðu, dvergar gjörðu, sem durin sagði. Then was Modsoknir the greatest and the highest of all dwarfs, and Sleeper was the second. Images of humans they made many of, from earth these dwarfs, as the Sleeper spoke it. So, the sentence building is of course poetical and very archaic, so I will render a more modern sentence. These dwarfs made many human-like images from the earth, as the Sleeper, who was second to Modsoknir, spoke it. So the Sleeper here appears to take the role of the power-singing Aesir. The human image theme is crucial because we realize that one of the possible meanings of the name of the first king of dwarfs could refer to images or stamps or marks. The proper interpretation of his name should, in my opinion, be image or marker suction vortexes. It's a bit hard. Image or a marker, and it's a vortex, a suction vortex, or it could be an image or a mark searcher. Vortexes or searchers are rendered in plural because of the word soknir or soknir being the plural form of the nouns. The plural within the one being is significant. The dwarf represents the greatest of all dwarfs, probably the king of dwarfs himself, from which others seem to emerge. The archaic prototype for them all. Another interesting thing is that it is almost impossible to distinguish the dwarfs from the human images. As we shall see, the dwarfs are in fact connected to the creation of human beings. It is tempting to ask the question, how would you have presented knowledge of genetic markers to a mythological-minded audience? But then, despite many interesting speculations about previous civilizations with a high level of technology, we must also consider the equally probable situation that no such knowledge existed. However, we should not underestimate the intellectual capacities of human beings, no matter what time they lived in. It is perfectly possible that some people without any technology other than their brain capacity simply figured out that the creatures of the world emerged from basic markers, basic images created by the gods, a basic image multiplying into countless variations. A third important aspect of this stanza is the dwarf Durin, which means sleeper, who is second to the first being. This reminds me of how Buri, grandfather to the gods, came second after Ymir, grandfather and grandmother of the giants, being in fact sleeping beneath the eyes of death. The two might be one, but the second is an aspect that serves a particular purpose, because he tells the images of humans. He speaks forth the human-shaped images. And he did that as they were created from the earth. Earlier, we saw how the world seems to have been told or sung into being as a huge optical illusion based on sound, speech, or storytelling. We recall how Snorri claimed that the dwarfs were given form by the atkvæði, the power words of the gods. The speech of creation is followed by a long listing of dwarfs' names, which I now assume represent the human-like images, or the images of humans. The forms, ideas, or models for different basic potentials in human beings. According to the Völusbok, these are Nye, nidi, nordre, sudre, austre, vestre, altsjofre, dvalin, nor og knain, nipinger, dain, bifur, bafur, bømbur, nori, ånd og ånar, oin, mjødvitner, vegger og gandalf, vindalfur, thorin, trår og thråin, fekker, liter og hviter, nyr og nyråder. Nu, hefi ek dverga, regin og rådsvider, rettum talda. Fili, kili, fundi, nali, hepti, vili, hanar, sviger, bellinger, bruni, bilder og buri, frår, hornbori, fräger og loni, aurvanger, jari og eiken skjaldi. Målar dverga i dvalins lidi, liona kindum i lofars telja, sottu fra salar steini, aurvanga sjåt til Gjøruvalla. Var draupner og dølgtraser, hår, haugspor i hlevanger, gloin, dori, ori, dufer, andvari, skirfir, virfir, skafider, ai. Alfer og yngvi, eiken, skjaldi, fjalar og frosti, finner og ginnar, that man uppi, medan öldlifer, langnidiga tal, lofars hafat. You got that? And I will just read these translations of the names that I made back then. I am sure we could discuss some of these names, but I think that the general picture is about certain aspects of human existence. And so I read it in English. Waxing, waning, northern, southern, eastern, western, ale, thief, hibernation, death and dying, close call and dead one, shaking, vibration, bomb tree, ship friend, another one, frightened one, mead witness, power drink, wand elf, wind elf, daring one, yearning and desiring one, appreciated, color, wisdom, renewal and new counsel. Now I have the dwarfs, ruler and counsel-wise, rightly counted. Hiding, wedge, found one, needle-sized, shaft, intent, skillful one, burner, twin, bushy-browed, blood knife, chamber, quick one, horn blower, famous, lazy, shining, gravel field, quarrelsome, crazy shields. After this impressive list of subtle cryptic names, the Völva continues. It is time to count the dwarfs of hibernation, to count the people of the laws. They set out from the rocky halls, from the gravel spaces to the earth fields. Interesting. They set out from the rocky halls, sottu fra salar steini, from the gravel spaces to the earth fields, aurvanga skjøt til Gjøruvalla. A new list of names follows, meaning there was the dripper and the hidden tracker, the high one, the burial mound spurrer, wind shielded, which means immortal, field glowing one, fool, snake, sleepy, alert spirit, cut out part, dyer, part finder, great grandfather, the elf and the sacred youth, the crazy shields, the spire and the frosty, finder and sacred warrior. And as long as humankind exists, the long list of the laws shall be remembered. So there is certain kind of dwarf that appears suddenly that's different from the others. And I read, something interesting has happened. Out of the great mass of almost incomprehensible dwarfs comes a special kind, the dwarfs of hibernation. Dvalins lidi. Dvalin means the hibernation, and lidi means a sort of flock, the people of Dvalin, the people of hibernation. So these, the people of hibernation, are also the people of Lofar, which I translate as of the law. I'm a bit uncertain if that should be reconsidered perhaps, but well, that was what I wrote then. But in any case, these special dwarfs, these dwarfs of hibernation, and who are among the people of the Lofar, the laws perhaps. Well, anyway, these are special. They came from Aurvanga. That directly means the gravel spaces or the gravel fields. And then they went to the Jöruvalla, the earth fields. And we remember that the images that were spoken by the sleeper, Durin, whom I identified with Buri, who slept or indeed hibernated beneath the eyes of death, and who became the grandfather of the Aesir. Well, it turns out that the Aesir indeed belong to these particular dwarfish people of Lofar, of Laws, who came from the gravel fields and to the earth fields, as the next stanza reads. And I'm not suggesting that this is about aliens coming from space to Earth, because it could just as well, and possibly probably more likely, I think that it has to do with how spiritual, limitless beings are able to enter the physical world, and that they came through the images of these so-called dwarfs, right? It doesn't have to be about coming from space, but coming from a spiritual realm and into this earth mode. Anyway, and the next stanza reads: Ons þrír komu úr því liði, Fylgjur og Ostgir, Aesir og Husi, fundu og landi, litt megandi, ask og emblu, örlögslausa. And that says, until 3 came out of that flock. And that flock is a direct reference to that flock which came from the gravel fields to the earth fields. So until 3 came out of that flock, powerful and loving Aesir to the homes. They found on the shore of little power, Ask and Embla, without destiny. So it has become clear that the Aesir indeed emerged from the flock of dwarfs that, supposedly, the Aesir had shaped. It is only through the flock of dwarfs that the Aesir could actually enter the human world and offer them the gift of spirit, thought and vitality, as they proceed to do in the next stanza of this poem. So before anyone inclines towards theories about ancient aliens and automatically assume that we are seeing evidence for alien intervention, I would like to point out that my translation of Aurvangar to the gravel spaces or the gravel fields is derived from the assumption that the word is made out of aur, which means gravel or mud or sand. And this is the same kind and the same word that is used when they speak of the sand or the mud that is found in Urdarbrunnur, the well of origin. And it's also made out of the noun vanger, which means an open place, a court or a field or just cleared space. I remember, it seems like I also juggled with the possibility that it could translate as out of illusion from aur, which means out of or from something, and the adjective vanger, which means false or illusionary. So if vanger refers to illusion, the aur could still be from aur and mean gravel, which is ultimately a symbol of matter, physical matter. And then we would end with the translation matter illusion. There could be a double or triple meaning in this place name where neither of these interpretations is directly wrong, but rather complement each other and provide different layers of understanding. So, I have heard from those who consider these dwarfs to be little grey aliens. I do not automatically reject such a theory, since I have no idea whether these really exist. There is obviously life out in space, and that's not a secret, or even, all the scientists, the astrophysics, they know this, that it's possible, but did they come here? That's another question. But what I often see when people present such interpretations of ancient myths is an almost consistent failure to regard all the details of these myths. In fact, often carefully ignoring every aspect of the myth that does not serve to support their theory, and often adding a little spice that was not there in the first place in order to support their theory. This happens a lot. I think we all do that, and we have to be very conscious about not doing that. So, in the case of the little grey aliens, we are usually told that they are out to get us, clothe us, and perform genetic experiments on us. Thus, the dwarfs who enter Earth from outer space and give their gifts to primeval human beings, helping to shape our destiny, could, from this perspective, be seen as early alien intruders out to experiment genetically on the human species. These are theories that I remember people suggested to me online in various comment sections back then. So that's why I was addressing this theme. Anyway, as weird as this idea may seem to those who are not already into the alien stuff, the idea itself is not entirely preposterous. As we shall see, the dwarfs do seem to be related to what we today call DNA, or genetic markers, as I'm gonna go through later. Yet the theory mentioned above also fails. To counter the alien grey approach, I would like to say that we are in fact not seeing a tale of how human beings already up and about are being messed with by alien powers. To think that would be to miss out on several important details in the myth, such as the crucial fact that the recipients, Aesir and Embla, were not yet even alive. They were without destiny, they were without breath, they were without thoughts, and they were without life. So no, they were not beings who were messed with from aliens. They were not actually living beings yet. They were just drifting matter, a potential for life discovered by the Aesir gods of awareness, who are not from another planet, but from the earliest emergence of cosmic consciousness. There is absolutely no evidence in the myths that the Aesir came from a particular planet or stellar system. They clearly emerged as non-physical consciousness in primeval space, and their gift to us is the gift of life itself. It was a gift of breath, of free thought, of poetry, of colour, and of heat. Hardly the story of an alien conspiracy or of dubitable scientific and genetic manipulation. This is rather a tale of spiritual intervention, where spirit enters matter in order to create the very first life. It is only through the dwarfish dimension of limited form and shape that the unshaped divine consciousness originating from the heart of the universe itself may take residence in physical bodies. This is a tale of how spirit, awareness, and vitality that was believed to have already existed without form in the early cosmos is made one with matter by going into and through the illusion of matter that they had prepared, so that conscious life may quicken and grow. Just a moment. So, just as we are seeing a story where gods, in the shape of dwarfs, enter the young earth from outer space, the rocky halls and the gravel spaces, we might also be seeing a deeper truth of how unlimited spiritual cosmic awareness, by entering the dwarfish, that is, the limited, the mutilated, the smaller made world of matter illusion into earth, breathe life and awareness into the potential for life matter of earth. Returning to the creation of dwarves and the gods who inhabit them or who walk through the images of them, it all starts to make sense. Both hibernation and sleeper are good metaphors for the sleeping frost giant, otherwise known as Buri, whose name means storage chamber and refers to something being stored in the eyes of the world of the dead, the frozen remains of the previous worlds. His descendants are the Aesir, who rightly could be called the people of laws, as they were the first to give order and laws to a chaotic universe. Like every other force of the cosmos, they all came from that one first universal being, the primeval sound, born by the wave or by the 9 waves. However, they were different from the first being because they emerged from the stored, slumbering dream speech that contained the memory of a previous world. Finally, the question is, why are giants and gods suddenly veiled and described as dwarfs? Well, as long as we insist on reading the myths as literal renderings of childish fairy tales, this poses a problem. We have gods there, we have giants here, and dwarfs are supposed to be different creatures entirely. But when we integrate the fact that the ancient poets applied folklore to serve their own end, to use them as metaphors for deeper meaning, it is easier to see that these so-called racial distinctions are of no importance or consequence and serve only one purpose, namely to reveal what kind of force is at work, in what kind of way, and under what kind of condition. According to Lotte von Motz, the Norse word for dwarf, dvergir, actually means mutilated, as in someone who has had a limb or a part of himself chopped off, severed, from his body. Motz uses this to illustrate how the dwarfs in the myths seem to play the role of priests, as do their mythical relatives, the smith and the dark elf. There is some evidence that priests had a part of their body mutilated during initiation, something which may have been reflected in the myth of Odin sacrificing his eye for the mead of wisdom, or in the sorcerers who seem to have suffered castration as part of their profession. I wholeheartedly agree that dwarves in other settings, together with smiths and dark elves, seem to represent typical pagan priests in many myths and stories, but this is not the only way that they appear. In the Völuspá, I believe they represent the original images of human beings emerging from the one to the many. Their craftiness is the craftiness of life itself. I believe that the term dvergir, dwarf, is used by the poets both because the concept that dwarfs brings to mind something that is smaller, and because the word itself means mutilated and indicates something that is not whole. What we are probably seeing here is a version of an ancient and widespread philosophy recognizable in the Indian poet Kamalakanta's Syama Sangit, Songs to Kali, in which he describes the creator goddess in action, applying an age-old concept of creation, which is limiting the limitless. Here are the limitless powers of cosmic awareness, divided into a trinity of spiritual, mental, and emotional qualities, entering the sphere of physical form, in which their original spiritual limitlessness is limited into spoken, or as in mind-created, forms. And here I picked out an image from a Scandinavian rock carving from the Bronze Ages, where you can see what I have obviously interpreted as, not scientifically, but you know, I thought so, from the gravel fields to the earth fields. So you can see this here. Anyway. Okay, I'm still not in great shape, I notice, so today this is gonna be it. Sure, it was a bit short this time, but I'll get back to you. So thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting me, and yeah, thank you. Have a nice time. Until next time.